She walked away from $100 million, not because she had to, not because the offers stopped coming, not because Hollywood rejected her, but because somewhere between the final Harry Potter premiere and the first morning she woke up without a script in her hand, Emma Watson realized something that would change everything. The girl who grew up inside the most magical story ever told had discovered a mission that made all of that seem small. And what she found would challenge everything we thought we knew about fame, purpose, and what it means to use your voice when the whole world is watching. On March 15, 2023, the internet noticed something strange. Emma Watson, the woman who grew up before our eyes as Hermione Granger, who became one of the most recognizable faces on the planet, had gone silent. Her Instagram account, followed by millions, went dark. No posts, no stories, no trace. Entertainment reporters scrambled. Tabloids speculated wildly. Fans panicked. And while everyone was guessing about scandals or nervous breakdowns, the truth was far more radical than anyone imagined. The girl who had everything Hollywood could offer had walked away. Not because she failed, but because she refused to disappear into the machine that made her. She chose herself over stardom. And that choice might be the bravest thing she's ever done. But to understand why Emma walked away, you have to go back to where it started. Not to the red carpets or the premiere parties. To a small audition room in the year 2000, where a 9-year-old girl with bushy brown hair was about to change her life forever. Emma Charlotte Duer Watson was born in Paris on April 15, 1990. Her parents were both lawyers, intelligent, grounded, practical people who understood the value of education and hard work. When she was 5 years old, they divorced, and Emma moved to England with her mother and brother. By all accounts, she was a normal kid. She loved school with an intensity that set her apart. She was in the theater club, she had friends, she had playdates and homework and bedtimes and all the ordinary rhythms of childhood that millions of kids experience. Then came Harry Potter. The casting call went out in 1999. They were looking for 3 unknowns to play Harry, Ron, and Hermione, 3 children who would carry one of the most anticipated film franchises in history. Thousands of kids auditioned. Thousands of hopefuls walked through those doors, dreaming of magic. Emma Watson, who had never been in a professional production, who had no agent, no connections, no Hollywood dreams, went 8 times. 8 rounds of callbacks, 8 chances to be rejected, 8 opportunities to give up and go back to her normal life. And each time, she came back. Not because she was desperate for fame, not because she wanted to be a movie star, but because she loved Hermione. She saw herself in that character, the bookish girl who was smarter than everyone else and didn't apologize for it. The girl who raised her hand first. The girl who read ahead in the textbook. The girl who corrected teachers not out of arrogance, but out of a genuine belief that if something was wrong, it needed to be made right. When she got the call that she'd been cast, she was 10 years old, and in that moment, everything changed. Here's what no one tells you about child stardom. It steals time. Not in the abstract way people talk about losing childhood or missing out on experiences. It literally takes hours, days, weeks, years that you'll never get back. For the next decade, Emma Watson's life wasn't her own. She spent her teenage years on film sets when other kids were at school dances. She learned lines instead of learning how to drive. She smiled for photographers when other kids were figuring out who they were in private. She walked red carpets when she should have been walking to class. The first Harry Potter film came out in November 2001. Emma was 11 years old. By the time the final film premiered in July 2011, she was 21. 10 years, 8 films, a childhood compressed into a franchise, a decade of her life that millions of people watched. commented on, judged, and claimed they knew. But here's the thing people don't talk about. Emma Watson wasn't just acting, she was becoming a symbol. Hermione Granger wasn't just a character, she was the smartest girl in the room, the one who always had the answer, the one who saved Harry and Ron over and over again with her intelligence, her quick thinking, her unwavering courage. And Emma, whether she wanted to or not, inherited that identity. People didn't just love Hermione, they projected Hermione onto Emma. They expected her to be brilliant, composed, articulate, perfect. Always. In every interview, in every appearance, in every moment of her public life. The line between character and actress blurred until it almost disappeared. And for a long time, Emma tried to live up to that impossible standard. Chapter 2. The turning point, when education changed everything. Even while filming Harry Potter, Emma fought to stay in school. Not the on-set tutors that most child actors get, professionals hired to ensure the bare minimum of education while prioritizing the filming schedule. Real school, actual classrooms, real teachers, real exams. She took her A-levels. She studied mathematics and science and literature. She graduated from Headington School in Oxford with straight A's across the board. And when Harry Potter finally ended in 2011, when she could have done literally anything in the world, when she could have signed on for another massive franchise or disappeared to some private island to recover from the intensity of the previous decade, she made a choice that confused almost everyone around her. She enrolled at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. Think about that for a second. You've just spent 10 years of your life as one of the most famous people on Earth. You've made more money than most people will see in a lifetime. You could buy a house in the Hollywood Hills. You could travel the world first class. You could take any role in any movie. And you choose to go to college. Not as a celebrity taking a few courses for appearance. As a full-time student pursuing a degree in English literature. Emma Watson moved into a dorm room. She went to lectures with hundreds of other students. She did her own laundry. She stood in line at the cafeteria. She sat in the library during finals week with textbooks spread across the table and coffee going cold as she studied. She tried, with every fiber of her being, to be normal. To be just another student. To build a life that wasn't defined by the 10-year-old girl who said, "It's Leviosa, not Leviosa." And for a while, it worked. She studied English literature with genuine passion. She read Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison and James Joyce. She wrote papers analyzing poetry and prose. She participated in class discussions. She joined study groups. She pulled all-nighters before exams. She experienced, perhaps for the first time since she was 9 years old, what it felt like to be evaluated on her merit rather than her fame. But normal doesn't work when you're famous. It can't. Other students took pictures of her in class. Some were kind about it, but others weren't. Tabloids followed her to campus. Paparazzi camped outside her dorm, waiting for candid shots they could sell. And every time she spoke in a seminar, every time she raised her hand to contribute to a discussion, people didn't hear Emma the student. They heard Hermione. The pressure was suffocating. The constant surveillance was exhausting. The inability to make mistakes privately, to be wrong without the world knowing, to just be a regular college student, it wore her down. So she transferred. First to Oxford for a year abroad, hoping that distance from American tabloid culture might give her breathing room. Then back to Brown. She kept trying to find a place where she could just be a person, where she could make mistakes without the world watching, where she could figure out what she actually wanted, not what everyone else expected, where she could separate Emma Watson, the actress, from Emma Watson, the human being. And slowly, quietly, something started to shift inside her. Between the takes and the premieres, between studying for exams and walking red carpets, between the film sets and the lecture halls, something was forming in Emma's mind. A question that wouldn't go away. A question that kept her up at night. A question that grew louder with each passing year. What was all of this for? The fame, the money, the attention, the magazine covers, the interviews, the constant performance. What was the point of having a platform, a massive global platform that reached hundreds of millions of people, if you didn't use it for something that mattered? If you just used it to sell movies and promote products and maintain your celebrity status? Most people don't ask themselves these questions until much later in life, if they ask them at all. Emma was asking them at 16. At 17, at 18. While other teenagers were worried about prom and college applications and first relationships, Emma was grappling with existential questions about purpose and meaning and responsibility. She started reading, not scripts, not celebrity memoirs, philosophy, feminist theory, political science, history. She discovered authors like Gloria Steinem and Bell Hooks, who articulated ideas that resonated deeply with her own experiences. She began to understand that the discomfort she felt, the sense that something wasn't quite right with the way women were perceived and treated both in Hollywood and in the world at large, wasn't just in her head. It wasn't oversensitivity or paranoia. It was structural. It was historical. It was everywhere once you knew how to look for it, and she couldn't unsee it. Once you see the patterns, once you understand the systems, once you recognize the inequality woven into the fabric of society, you can't just go back to ignoring it. You can't unknow what you know. During the later Potter films, Emma became known on set for something unusual. Between scenes, while other actors were relaxing in their trailers or socializing with the crew, Emma would often be found in a corner somewhere, reading dense academic texts, books about gender studies and feminist philosophy, articles about global inequality and women's rights. The crew found it endearing, even admirable, this young actress who took education so seriously, who read books that would challenge most adults. But they didn't quite understand what was happening. Emma wasn't just reading to pass time or to appear intellectual. She was educating herself with purpose. She was preparing for something she hadn't fully articulated yet, even to herself. A mission that was taking shape in the quiet moments between action and cut. Chapter 3. The Risk, the UN Speech, and the Threats. The final Potter film wrapped in 2010. Emma was 20 years old. She had spent more than half her life playing Hermione Granger. She was wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams. She could have done anything, taken any role, pursued any path. The world was quite literally at her feet. Major directors were calling her agent. Fashion houses were offering exclusive contracts worth millions. She could have become the biggest movie star of her generation without breaking a sweat. Instead, she did something that genuinely confused the people around her. She committed fully to her education. She turned down roles, major roles, roles that would have paid her millions and kept her in the public eye, so she could finish her degree at Brown. In 2014, Emma graduated. She had managed to complete her degree despite the chaos of her career, despite having to take semesters off for filming obligations, despite the constant pull of opportunities that would have made most people abandon their education without a second thought. The day she graduated, Emma didn't post about it on social media. She didn't do press interviews about her achievement. She simply walked across that stage, collected her diploma, and allowed herself one moment of private satisfaction. And then, she got to work on what would become the defining mission of her life. The United Nations had been watching Emma for a while. They saw in her something genuinely rare in the world of celebrity activism, a young woman with massive global influence who was actually committed to learning and understanding complex issues rather than just lending her name for publicity. They saw someone who had spent years educating herself, who asked difficult questions, who wasn't satisfied with superficial answers. In July 2014, they appointed her as a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador. At 24 years old, Emma Watson stepped into a role that would change not just her career trajectory, but her entire life. There's a photograph that exists somewhere in the archives of the United Nations. It shows a young woman standing at a podium, her hands gripping the edges with a tension that speaks volumes. Her face carries an expression that's part determination, part terror. This isn't a movie premiere. There are no screaming fans, no red carpets, no flashing cameras competing for the perfect angle. This is September 20th, 2014, and Emma Watson is about to deliver a speech that will either define her future or destroy the credibility she spent a decade building. She's 24 years old. She could be anywhere else in the world. She could be on a beach in the Maldives, finally enjoying the freedom that comes after spending a decade in the same role. She could be in Hollywood, accepting roles that would make her the highest-paid actress of her generation. Instead, she has chosen to stand in front of world leaders, diplomats, journalists, and millions watching online, and speak about something that makes even seasoned politicians uncomfortable. Gender equality, but not in the safe, sanitized way that celebrities usually approach social issues, not with vague platitudes about empowerment or girl power. Emma was about to launch the He for She campaign, a movement explicitly designed to involve men in the fight for gender equality, a movement that challenged both traditional gender roles and the way feminism itself had been framed and understood. The speech she gave that day wasn't just a call to action, it was a declaration of intention. It was Emma Watson saying, "I'm not just lending my name to this cause, I'm putting everything on the line, my reputation, my credibility, my career, my safety." She spoke with a vulnerability that was shocking in its honesty. She talked about being sexualized by the British press from the age of 14. She talked about being called bossy for exhibiting leadership qualities that would be called strong in boys. She talked about struggling with the expectations placed on her, about the impossible standards she felt compelled to meet. She talked about her own doubts and fears, her own journey toward understanding feminism not as a dirty word, but as a framework for equality. And for the first time in her public life, Emma Watson wasn't performing. She wasn't playing Hermione. She wasn't giving carefully crafted answers designed to avoid controversy. She was speaking as herself, vulnerable, honest, imperfect, real. And the world listened. The speech went viral instantly. Within hours, it had millions of views. Within days, tens of millions. People from every continent, from every background, shared it and discussed it and quoted it. Men and women alike were moved by her vulnerability, her clarity, her courage. For many people, it was the first time they'd heard someone articulate what they'd felt but never been able to express. For many men, it was the first time they'd been invited into the conversation about gender equality rather than being positioned as the enemy. It should have been a triumph. It was a triumph. Emma Watson had used her platform for something meaningful. She had spoken truth to power. She had started conversations in millions of homes and schools and workplaces around the world. But here's what happened next. The backlash, the punishment for speaking out. Within hours of the speech, an anonymous website appeared online threatening to leak nude photos of her. The website had a countdown timer. It looked official, frightening, real. It turned out to be a hoax, a cruel prank designed specifically to punish Emma for speaking out, to scare her into silence. But the message was clear, unmistakable, chilling. Step out of line, speak up for women's rights, challenge the status quo, and we will destroy you. We will violate your privacy. We will humiliate you. We will make you regret using your voice. For a lot of people, that would have been enough. Enough to go silent. Enough to retreat back into the safety of just being an actress, just making movies, just staying in your lane. Enough to decide that activism wasn't worth the price. Emma Watson didn't stop. She didn't retreat. She didn't go silent. In the face of those threats, in the face of coordinated harassment campaigns, in the face of people actively trying to destroy her for having the audacity to speak about equality, Emma doubled down. She kept speaking. She kept showing up. She traveled to Uruguay to advocate for women's political participation. She went to Malawi to promote girls' education. She visited Bangladesh to meet with garment workers fighting for fair labor practices. She used her platform not to sell movies or perfume or fashion lines, but to amplify voices that weren't being heard, to shine light on issues that were being ignored. Think about that. At 24 years old, after receiving literal death threats, after being targeted by organized online harassment, after having her safety threatened simply for speaking about equality, Emma Watson could have walked away. She could have returned to Hollywood, taken the safe roles, made the blockbusters that would have made her the biggest star in the world, lived a comfortable life as just another actress. She chose to fight instead. Chapter 4: The New Era: Ethical Fashion and Quiet Activism. While Hollywood kept offering her roles, big roles, franchise roles, roles that could have made her even richer and more famous, Emma started making different choices. Choices that confused industry insiders. Choices that seemed to prioritize meaning over money, impact over image. In 2017, she made a decision that had people questioning her judgment. She turned down the lead role in La La Land. Let that sink in for a moment. She turned down the lead role in what would become one of the most successful and critically acclaimed films of the decade. The film went on to win 6 Academy Awards and launched Emma Stone into the absolute stratosphere of Hollywood stardom. It would have been the perfect vehicle for Emma Watson to transition from child star to adult actress, to cement her place as a leading woman in Hollywood. People thought she was crazy. Industry insiders shook their heads. Fans were confused. Why would you turn down a role like that? Why would you walk away from what was clearly going to be a massive success? But Emma had her reasons. She didn't want to be in another movie just because it would be successful or critically acclaimed or good for her career. She had reached a point in her life where she wanted to be in movies that actually mattered to her personally. Movies that aligned with her values. Movies that said something she believed was important. So instead of La La Land, she took the role of Belle in Disney's live-action Beauty and the Beast. And it wasn't the compromise it might have seemed. Belle was a character Emma had connected with since childhood. A girl who loved books more than parties, who didn't fit into the narrow expectations of her village, who wanted more than the prescribed life everyone expected her to accept. A girl who chose knowledge over popularity, who chose adventure over safety, who chose being herself over being what others wanted her to be. The film made over $1 billion worldwide. Emma was at the absolute peak of her commercial success. She could have done anything, named her price for any role, signed on for massive franchises, become one of the highest paid actresses in history. But something else was happening simultaneously. Something quieter, but potentially more revolutionary. Emma was transforming the fashion industry from the inside. When she appeared on red carpets for Beauty and the Beast and other events, she wasn't just wearing beautiful dresses. She was wearing ethical designers. She was promoting sustainable fashion. She was using every single appearance, every moment when cameras were pointed at her, when magazines would write about what she was wearing, when millions of people would see and potentially emulate her style, to highlight brands that treated their workers fairly, that used environmentally sustainable materials, that refused to participate in the destructive cycle of fast fashion. In 2016, she launched a dedicated Instagram account focused entirely on ethical fashion. She showed exactly where her clothes came from and who made them. She interviewed the designers and artisans. She explained the production processes. She made transparency the new luxury. It was revolutionary in its simplicity. No other celebrity of her level was doing this. Most celebrities were being paid millions to promote whatever brand offered them the most money. Emma was using her influence to change the conversation entirely. She wasn't using fashion as an accessory to her fame. She was using fashion as a platform for change, as a tool for education, as a way to show that ethics and style weren't mutually exclusive, that you could look beautiful and also ensure that no one was exploited in the process. Chapter 5. The Silence. When enough becomes enough. In 2018, she starred in Little Women, Greta Gerwig's adaptation of the classic novel. Emma played Meg March, the eldest sister who chooses a simple domestic life over artistic ambition or social advancement. It was a small role compared to what she could have taken, but the character resonated with Emma in ways she was only beginning to understand. Meg March was content. She knew what she wanted. She didn't need external validation or public success to feel fulfilled. The role felt personal. Because by 2018, Emma was starting to question everything about her life. The premieres that required her to smile and perform for hours. The press tours that sent her around the world talking about the same movie to hundreds of different journalists. The constant performance of being Emma Watson, feminist icon, perfect role model, Hermione Granger all grown up. She was exhausted. Not physically tired, though she was that too. But emotionally, spiritually, existentially exhausted. She had spent her entire conscious life being watched, being judged, being analyzed, being held to impossible standards. Every outfit was scrutinized. Every word was dissected. Every relationship was tabloid fodder. Every decision was public property. And she was beginning to realize something that terrified her. The fame she had, the kind of fame she'd had since she was 10 years old, wasn't freedom. It was a cage. A gilded, luxurious, enviable cage. But a cage nonetheless. So she made a decision that would confuse even more people than her previous ones. She started stepping back. She turned down roles, big roles, franchise roles, roles that any actress would kill for. She stopped doing press beyond what was contractually obligated. She started setting boundaries, real, firm boundaries about what she would and wouldn't do, what parts of her life were public and what parts were private and non-negotiable. And then 2020 happened. The pandemic. The world shut down. And suddenly, Emma, along with everyone else, had permission to stop, to stay home, to step off the treadmill of constant productivity and achievement, to breathe. During those months of lockdown, Emma did something she had never really done in her adult life. She examined her life honestly, not the life everyone thought she had, not the life she projected on Instagram or in interviews, but the life she was actually living day to day. She started therapy, real, consistent, deep therapy to untangle decades of complicated feelings about identity and fame and purpose. She started journaling, writing pages and pages of thoughts she'd never allowed herself to fully think. She read books about identity and self-worth and healing. She talked to friends who weren't in the industry, who knew her as Emma, not as Emma Watson. She spent time alone, real time, not the 5 minutes between interviews or the brief moments in a car between events. Days, weeks, months of genuine solitude. And slowly, painfully, she started to understand something that had been true for years, but that she'd never had the space or courage to admit to herself. She didn't want to be a movie star anymore, not because she didn't love acting, not because she'd failed or lost her passion, but because the version of fame she had, the particular kind of celebrity she'd been living with since childhood, wasn't sustainable. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't hers. She had built her entire identity around being the girl who did everything right, the straight A student who became the UN ambassador, who became the feminist icon, who became the perfect role model. And the weight of that impossible perfection was crushing her. In interviews from 2019 and 2020, you can hear it in her voice if you listen carefully. She's measured, as always, articulate and thoughtful. But there's something underneath, a sadness, a weariness, a sense of someone who's been holding their breath for too long. She talks about feeling caged, about being on a tightrope where one wrong move could send everything crashing down, about the pressure of being seen as a role model when you're just trying to figure out your own life. And while the world kept celebrating her accomplishments, kept praising her activism, kept holding her up as an example of what celebrity should be, Emma Watson was quietly suffocating under the weight of all that expectation. Then came 2023, and the silence that made headlines around the world. Emma Watson stopped posting on social media. She declined interviews. She turned down roles. She withdrew from public life as completely as someone of her fame level possibly could. And the world panicked. Where was she? What was she doing? Was she okay? Had something terrible happened? But Emma didn't owe anyone an explanation. And for the first time in her adult life, she didn't give one. Here's what we know now, from the few carefully chosen interviews she's given since. Emma spent those months doing what she should have been allowed to do years earlier. She rested, really rested. Not a weekend off between projects, but months of actual rest. She healed from decades of being public property. She rebuilt a relationship with herself that wasn't defined by what the world expected from her. She learned to say no without guilt or explanation. She learned that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was survival. She learned that she didn't have to justify her choices to strangers on the internet or journalists or fans who felt they had a claim on her life because they'd watched her grow up on screen. She didn't disappear. She just stopped performing. And for someone who had been performing, in one way or another, since she was 10 years old, that wasn't a tragedy. It was a triumph. Epilogue. The real magic. In the rare interviews Emma has given since her return to semi-public life, there's a lightness in her voice that wasn't there before. An ease. A sense of someone who has finally figured out who they are, separate from who everyone expected them to be. She doesn't apologize for stepping back. She doesn't justify her choices. She simply talks about living a life that belongs to her. A life where not every moment is content, where not every choice is a headline, where she can be wrong or messy or uncertain without the world weighing in. She recently said something in an interview that didn't go viral, didn't trend on social media, didn't make headlines, but it should have. She said, "I'm not interesting because I was in Harry Potter. I'm interesting because of what I do now. And if what I do now is rest, then that's interesting too." That quote is revolutionary. The idea that rest is interesting, that stepping back is brave, that you don't have to justify your choices or prove your worth through constant achievement and visibility, that being human, messy, complicated, tired, uncertain, is more valuable than being perfect. Today, Emma Watson is 34 years old. She's not on magazine covers every month. She's not starring in the biggest blockbusters. She's not dominating entertainment news cycles. And she's okay with that. More than okay. She's thriving. She's still producing projects, but selectively. She's still mentoring young activists, but privately. She's working on a documentary about women's rights activists around the world. She's partnered with several nonprofits focused on girls' education. She's writing and thinking and learning and growing. The work continues, but it continues on her terms. She uses her platform, but she doesn't let the platform use her. She's still a role model, but not the impossible, perfect kind she used to be. She's human, flawed, real. And in being willing to show that humanity, she's actually become more relatable, more inspiring, more valuable as a voice for change. What makes Emma's story so compelling isn't that she's perfect. It's the opposite. She's made mistakes. She's said things she later regretted. She struggled publicly with the weight of expectation and the reality of living up to an impossible standard. What makes her story compelling is the consistency of her commitment. The way she keeps showing up, keeps speaking out, keeps trying to use whatever influence she has for something that matters, even when it would be so much easier to stop. This is what courage looks like in the modern age. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Not the certainty of being right, but the willingness to learn and grow when you're wrong. Not the pursuit of perfection, but the commitment to progress and authenticity. Emma Watson understands this in her bones, and in understanding it, in living it despite the costs and challenges, she offers a blueprint for anyone who has ever wondered what to do with whatever platform or privilege they possess. The mission isn't complicated. It's not about grand revolutionary gestures, though those can matter. The mission is about integration, closing the gap between who you are in public and who you are in private. About using your voice, whatever its volume, in service of values you genuinely believe in. About refusing to accept injustice as inevitable, even when fighting it is exhausting and thankless and never quite enough. Emma Watson could have been anything after Potter ended. She could have been the biggest movie star in the world, collecting Oscars and $100 million paychecks. She could have disappeared into private luxury, living off her wealth in obscurity. She could have become another cautionary tale of child stardom gone wrong, spiraling into addiction or public breakdown. Instead, she became something much more interesting and much more important. She became a woman who understands that fame is currency, and currency has value only when you spend it on something that actually matters. Someone who recognizes that perfection is impossible and that the attempt to maintain it will destroy you. Someone who knows that rest isn't failure. It's necessary for survival. On quiet mornings in her London home, when the demands of whatever projects she's working on feel overwhelming, Emma sometimes thinks about that 9-year-old girl who auditioned 8 times for a role she desperately wanted. That girl who had no idea what she was stepping into, what the next 2 decades would bring, how her life would become something both magical and unbearably complicated beyond anything she could have imagined. She thinks about how that girl would feel about the woman she's become, and she hopes, quietly but deeply, that young Emma would be proud. Not of the fame or the fortune or the recognition or the achievements that look so impressive from the outside, but of the choice to use it all, the platform, the privilege, the influence, for something larger than herself. And of the courage to step back when that work started destroying her. This is the mission. This is the work. This is what Emma Watson cares about after Potter. And in a world that often mistakes celebrity for substance, that confuses visibility with value, her commitment to using fame as a tool rather than an end goal feels genuinely revolutionary. She's not perfect. She'll be the first to tell you that. She's still learning, still growing, still making mistakes, and having to course correct. But she's shown up consistently for over a decade now, using her voice even when it's scary, even when it costs her opportunities and money, even when it would be so much easier to just stay silent and cash the checks. And that consistency matters more than any single speech or action ever could. It matters to the girls who watched Hermione Granger and learned that intelligence is beautiful, that being smart is something to celebrate rather than hide. It matters to the women who watched Emma's UN speech and felt seen and validated for the first time in their struggles. It matters to everyone who has ever wondered if one person's voice can actually make a difference in a world that feels increasingly broken. Emma's life is proof that it can. Not in the dramatic, world-changing way that movies portray, where one speech or one action transforms everything overnight, but in the quieter, more sustainable, more real way of showing up consistently, speaking out despite fear, and refusing to accept that injustice and inequality are just how things have to be. The mission continues. The work is never done. There will always be more to say, more to do, more ways to use whatever influence you have to make things better. And somewhere between the girl who loved acting and the woman who found her purpose beyond the camera, Emma Watson discovered something worth more than all the magic in Harry Potter's world. She discovered that the real magic, the kind that actually changes lives, is using whatever you've been given to leave the world better than you found it. One speech, one action, one brave choice at a time, even when you're tired, even when you're criticized, even when you need to step back and rest. The work continues. And Emma Watson is showing us what it looks like to do that work while also protecting yourself, honoring your humanity, and refusing to be destroyed by the very platform you're using for good. The girl who taught us that intelligence is power has now taught us something even more important: that knowing when to step back is just as powerful as knowing when to step up. That protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. That you don't owe the world your exhaustion, or your mental health, or your entire self. That being real and flawed and human is more valuable than being perfect. That rest is revolutionary in a culture that demands constant productivity. Hermione Granger would be proud. And Emma Watson, she's finally free. If this story moved you, if it challenged how you think about success and purpose, and what it means to use your voice well, subscribe to Quiet Fame. Because we tell the stories that matter, the ones that don't fit into headlines, the ones about real people behind the personas, the ones about choosing yourself when the world wants you to keep performing.